Ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening to all of you. Welcome to the 5th installment of the UCL Talks series, a program that gives us students the opportunity to meet with, to speak to, and to learn from the stories of eminent Sri Lankan personalities. Here with us today is a person who has brought much pride to all of us as Sri Lankans. Jayanthi Kuru-Utumpala, the first ever Sri Lankan to summit Mount Everest. Welcome to UCL. To start off with, I cordially invite our CEO, Mr. Gihan Silva, to address the gathering.
Thank you, Shania. Ms. Jayanthi Kuru-Utumpala, Dr. Dhananjay Kulkarni, Ms. Nishani De Silva, Mr. Chamikara Jayakodi, faculty, staff, our invitees, and my dear students. A warm welcome to UCL Talks, a program that we initiated for our students to learn from the best, emulate greatest Sri Lankans, and to go beyond. And as Shania said, we had Mr. Asoka Hettigoda to talk about the Siddhalepa story. We had Mr. Ajit Gunawardana telling our students how Pygmy was started, and of course shared his long years of experience at John Keel's Holdings. The great Mr. Merrill Fernando, the founder of Dilma, who shared his story of creating a global brand, global Sri Lankan brand, and Mr. Keith Moder of Vatusa, who's also been part of a multi-billion-dollar Sri Lankan company who's now headquartered in USA. And these are all Sri Lankans who've attained great heights. But today, for a change, we have someone who's achieved the greatest height among them. And the first Sri Lankan to do so. We at UCL are very proud of your great achievement, a stupendous achievement. And thanks to Dr. Alice's invitation and our conversations that we had, we are extremely delighted and proud to have you at UCL to share your great story and to inspire our students and all of us at UCL. May I invite Shania to formally introduce Jayanthi to the audience.
Passionate about climbing since day one, be it climbing the tall cupboards at home or all the coconut trees in her garden, Jayanthi Kuru-Utumpala went on to achieve her childhood dream of summiting Mount Everest. And not only that, she went on to achieve that dream and be the first of us Sri Lankans to do so, doing us all very proud in the process. She is also a gender specialist and a feminist with years' worth of experience in working on women's rights. Ms. Kuru-Utumpala, the floor is all yours.
First of all, thank you so much for inviting me here today to address all of you. I must say that usually my climbing partner, Johan, and I share this story together because climbing Everest was a team effort. There were two of us, not just myself. But unfortunately, Johan is overseas at the moment and he's unable to be here. So I will share the story. So while I wait for the, I have a PowerPoint presentation, but don't worry, there's no text on it, it's only photographs from the journey so that hopefully you all won't fall asleep. The idea what I want to talk about today is climbing this mountain, and also in that process talk about the lessons, the life lessons that both Johan and I learned in this process. Because it's not just about climbing a mountain. It is on the one hand, but there was so much more that we learned about ourselves, right? So that's Johan in the photograph that you can see. And as the introduction mentioned, climbing Everest actually was a childhood dream. It was something that I was telling Mr. Gihan here earlier downstairs that it was something that I wanted to do since I was about 6 or 8 years old. So So what I was saying is, I mean, this has been a dream since I was really young, but it was not a dream that I shared with anyone. You know, at that age, many of you would have also gone through this. People ask you, usually uncles and aunties, who are like, darling, what do you want to do when you grow up, right? You've all heard this question, and they'll come and pinch your cheeks and say that. And of course, for me, the answer was, in my heart, it was to say, what I didn't say was that it was to climb Mount Everest. But I would say silent because I was too scared to say that that was my dream. Because also there was a correct answer, right? You have to say either you want to be a doctor or a lawyer or an engineer or something fabulous like that. Not just climbing a mountain. So this was something that I carried with me throughout my life. And climbing again, I love climbing, as I did climb the cupboards, almirahs when I was small. I would keep a pillow on the ground, climb to the top, jump down. Climb again, jump down. It sounds crazy, but I would do that. In the garden, and I lived in Dehiwala, so we had a garden with lots of trees. There was an alligator pear tree, avocado, mango trees, jackfruit trees, and about 3 coconut trees. And my brother and I would climb all the trees, except the coconut tree, only I was able to climb this, right? So climbing, as you can see, was something I was really passionate about since I was young. Now, with Everest, I mean, you can't only go from climbing trees to climbing a mountain like this. You need a lot more experience. And so, I mean, I'll just start off with quickly running through some of the key topics that I will cover in this presentation. So I'm going to talk about the importance of dreaming big, about setting goals for yourselves. Because the topic today is about climbing your own Everest, right? Because we all have different mountains to climb. And they could be metaphorical in many senses. So when you're climbing your own mountain, what's important to remember is that you need to also dream big, think big. There's a research phase, a planning phase, which is also important. Then there's also training and teamwork if you are working as a team. I mean, most of us are always working as a team, and that's a key element as well. It's also important to adapt to change, and I'll come to that in the presentation. We can't be stuck in the Stone Age, for example. We have to move with time, move with the changes around us, and adapt to that. There are many challenges we have to face on the way. We have to also make tough decisions along the way. Sometimes there could be life or death decisions as well, right? And we can also challenge stereotypes in that same process. So just to start off with a bit of background, in 2012 was when I met Johan, actually the year before in 2011, when I met my climbing partner. Now, I found out about him because someone mentioned, oh, there's this guy called Johan. So I had heard of him because he's a well-known hairdresser. Some of you may have heard of Cutting Station, which is a chain of salons that he owns. So I had heard of him because he's like a well-known person in Colombo, but I didn't know him. But a friend of mine said, oh, you must meet him because he's also as crazy about mountains as you are. And he connected me with him. And Johan was planning a mountain to an expedition to a mountain called Island Peak in Nepal the following year, and I asked him, can I join you and your team? And he agreed. So, but just a rewind before this time, when I was about 23 years old, I did a mountaineering course in the Indian Himalayas at a school called the Himalayan Mountaineering Institute. So I went to India for my first degree. I did English literature in Delhi University. And as soon as my course finished, I did a mountaineering course because for me, I couldn't come back to Sri Lanka without seeing the Himalayas. Like snow mountains was like a huge thing for me. I was like, wow. And I remember on that course, you could see Everest from a distance. And for me, that was just like, wow, one day if I could climb this mountain, that will be amazing. That's all I thought. But I never thought it would ever be possible. It was still just one of those things you never go after, right? It was just at the back of my head. But the year after that, I did another mountaineering course, again 1 month long. It's run by the Indian Army. And they teach you about ice climbing, rock climbing, how to rescue yourself, how to survive on the mountain. So that is where I had my basic training in mountaineering, because you can't undertake something like Everest without that basic knowledge and experience. And then over the years, with my career, with my job back in Sri Lanka, I took time off whenever I got a chance. I was sent on conferences. I would save my per diem, find the biggest rock or the biggest mountain, take a few days off, sometimes no pay leave, and go climb, because I love climbing. So I would find the time to do that as well, right? And then we fast forward to 2012. With Johan, we climbed Island Peak, which is about 6,000 meters. Now, it was important before climbing Everest that we first start step by step. So now in Sri Lanka, the tallest mountain we have is 2,425 meters. So let's say about 2,500 meters. So if you want to, and that's not so tall compared to Everest, which is 8,850 meters. So it is important to make sure that you also climb other mountains, work as a team, and this was part of that exercise as well. And while we were on this mountain, I told Johan, I said, look, because we could see Everest in the distance, this peak is not so far from Everest. And I said, Johan, one day would you ever consider climbing Everest? And I shared that dream I had with him, because I knew he was also as crazy as I was about mountains, and I felt safe to share it. I didn't share it with many others, right? Because I was scared they'll think I'm like crazy, basically. And he actually said, yeah, why not? Let's think about it. Let's read more about it. Let's plan for this together. And then we thought the following year, let's also climb another peak. 2 years later, we climbed Kilimanjaro, the tallest in Africa, in Africa. And again, we went back as a team because it was important for us to now get to know each other as a team. Because you need to survive for about 2 weeks, at least for this mountain, on the mountain. And on Everest, it's a 2-month journey. So if you don't like your climbing partner, it's no fun climbing a mountain together. So it was important for us to figure out, did we gel, did we not, did we work well as a team? And even after climbing Kilimanjaro, we realized actually we complemented each other's strengths and weaknesses. And that was important for both of us. And there was a lot of trust that was built over these 5 years. Because only after we came back from Kilimanjaro, we thought, you know what, okay, we've climbed these 2 together. We both really want to do this. Shall we give it a go? Shall we try in 2016 to climb Everest? And then that's when we really began putting our minds to it properly, and we started training together as well. We would train separately before that, but we thought, let's train together. And that was also important. Now, remember that there was no one forcing us to do this. Like in your university, you have teachers not forcing you, but they tell you, do your homework, do your readings, do your assignments, right? Here, no one was telling us, you have to go for training in the morning. We had to make sure that we would be at Independence Square at 5 a.m., and we work out till 7 a.m., shower, go to work, get to work at 9 or 8:30 or whatever time, work the whole day, sometimes in the evening, meet at the pool, do some swim sessions, and that was our entire week. About 5-6 days a week, we would just train. And we had to find the time to do that, in between all our work. Because remember, we're not just only climbers, that's only a hobby. We have, Johan's a full-time hairdresser, and I work on gender equality. I work for a non-governmental organization, and that takes more than 8 hours a day. So we had to find that time, and that was also important, right? Because we really wanted to do this. And it didn't matter, sometimes we'd both go, I would have gone partying all night and come back at 2 o'clock in the morning, let's say on a Friday night. But that didn't matter, because Saturday morning, I had a commitment to be at Independence Square to train with Johan. And he was there because I was also going to be there. And that was a commitment we made to each other, which was also important, right? Then we had to also, our biggest mountain before we went was not the individuals. I don't mean the individuals on the picture, in the picture. What I mean is that the biggest mountain we had before we went was actually raising money for this, sponsorship. It was horrendous. It was so difficult because, first of all, it costs a huge amount of money. I mean, it costs about 10 million rupees per person, 9 million, let's say. And when you put it in perspective, okay, it costs the same as like an SUV, like a Kia, one of those, or I don't know, some vehicle, think of an SUV, about the same price. Now, I didn't own a car at the time, and I did have people saying, you're going to spend that much on this mountain? You don't have a car, you don't have a house, are you crazy? But I wanted to climb this mountain. So then you go after that, right? It doesn't matter that you don't have a house or car, I wanted to climb this. And so did Johan. He had a car though, but that's okay. Anyway, but the point was that when we then wanted sponsorship, nobody actually believed that we could do this. So Johan is in the business community, so he had a lot of contacts. So he knew some CEOs, managing directors, but many of them also didn't really want to meet us even, because it was almost like, who are these two mad Sri Lankans who think they can climb Everest? And no one in Sri Lanka has done this. So first of all, why do you want to do this? What is at the top of this mountain? Someone even asked us, some CEO was like, from a bank. This person was like, what do you get at the top of Everest? Why do you want to do this? Why do you want to spend so much money on this mad thing? Like, people just didn't understand us, right? And then there were people who finally did give us an interview, or an appointment rather, and then they would look at us and laugh. They'd be like, the two of you, physically, are looking at our sizes. And I know I'm not so big, but still, someone even told me, you're so tiny, how can you climb Everest? So of course, I had to deal with all of this. Someone asked Johan, may have been too scared to ask me directly. They're like, Machang, why are you going with her? Like, she's a woman, she'll fail, you will also fail. Like, go with someone who can do this. Like, look at her size, So these are all the comments that come your way. For various reasons, your size, your color, your gender, all sorts of things. But eventually, we didn't get financial sponsorship from the government. What we did get was 2 letters of endorsement saying that these are the first 2 Sri Lankans who are going to attempt this challenge, and please support them. So then we took those letters and went back to the corporate sector and said, please, we've got endorsement from the President and Prime Minister, can you please support us? And we kept going, we had to not give up, basically. And finally, about a month before we left the country is when we got our full sponsorship. And we were fortunate that we did have colleagues from the corporate sector who did step forward and believe in our dream. And they were willing to also take that risk, because maybe we might not come back from this journey alive. And that was a real risk, right? But we were grateful that about 8 to 10 big companies did come behind us, and many others also, and put their faith in us. And that was part of our bigger team as well, that made it possible for us to take the Sri Lankan flag to the top of the world, right? Then we have the journey itself. We left on the 28th of March in 2016, quite some time ago now, 3 years ago actually. And once we get to Kathmandu in Nepal first, and once we get to Kathmandu, we meet our mountaineering company. So we go with a mountaineering company that gives us the guides and provides all the logistics. And then we begin our journey from Kathmandu. You take a small flight or a helicopter, because the weather was quite bad that day. And we begin the journey. We take the helicopter to the trailhead, to the start of the trek, to a place called Lukla. And from that point onwards, your journey begins by foot, right? So the trail here you can see in this photograph here. There's a footpath, and there are these suspension bridges as well. So it's quite beautiful. And you kind of go up, and you go down, and you go up, and you down multiple times. And you walk for about 12 days until we reach Everest Base Camp, right? 12 to 14 days. I can see some of your faces. 12 is nothing compared to the rest of the journey. So that's like the good part of this journey. And of course by foot, because remember this is not a motorable road. So no vehicles can go on this road. It's only a footpath, and only these yaks are the only animals that, they would carry our bags, but we couldn't hitch a ride on them. You had to walk, basically. There was no other option. So we walk for 2 weeks, and then we arrive at Everest Base Camp, which looks like this, which is quite often covered in snow. And remember, base camp is at a height of 17,500 feet. Now to put it in perspective, think of Piduritalagala, the tallest mountain in Sri Lanka, which is about 8,000 feet. So this is almost double the height of that, right? So it's fairly high up. And what happens here is that one of the hardest things I remember was that when we got to base camp, I remember telling Johan, it was also around the Sinhala Tamil New Year. Now at base camp there was Wi-Fi. One of the luxuries we had at base camp was Wi-Fi, which was great because we could keep in touch with our family. And they were sending pictures of Kaung Kokis and all the celebrations at home, which didn't help because we were anyway homesick and we had no Kaung Kokis. Then I remember telling Johan, I was like, gosh, can you imagine that this is now going to be our home for the next 1.5 months, right? 1.5 months more at this place and beyond. Because we had only completed 2 weeks of the journey. We had another 6 weeks more to go. And that was a horrible thought. And our home is these tents that you can't stand up inside. Even I have to kneel inside that tent, right? The bigger tent is where we would have our meals. But just to quickly explain, at base camp, one of the hardest things was that there's no greenery, right? In the previous photograph, you would have seen trees and there were bushes. But nothing grows out here. Not even a blade of grass. There's no moss, nothing at all. The only thing you see is just ice and rock. So it's very stark. It's like a moonscape. It's really unusual, especially when we live on an island and there's anywhere you look, you'll find some plant somewhere, some greenery, right? Here there was nothing, and that was really, psychologically was quite difficult. And the reason there's no greenery is also because base camp at this height, there's only 50% oxygen in the atmosphere, right? So we were also told don't run, don't jump, because when there's less oxygen, what happens to your blood? It starts to get thicker. People doing science in here? Anyone doing medical subjects? Oh no, you said that there are no medical subjects here, no? Right. Anyway, if you've done science for A-levels, you know that when there's less oxygen, your blood gets thicker. So if you run or jump, you can faint. So we were told we had to walk, breathe deeply, and get used to our new home. Now let me just explain why does it take 2 months to climb this mountain. Now here, what we have here is our route map. We can see base camp down here, right, the arrow, the triangle. And then we have camp 1, camp 2, camp 3, camp 4 up here, and all the way there is the summit. So that's Everest at the back. Now, unlike any other journey, we do not climb, we don't go just 1, 2, 3, 4 up at the top, no. Because then you're definitely not going to come back down alive. Our goal was to climb the mountain, but also come back down in like 2 pieces, Johan and myself, full, in whole, not in a box, basically. So, so what happens on this journey is that anyone climbing Everest, you start from base camp, then we have to do these rotations. They're called acclimatization rotations, so that our bodies get used to the lower levels of oxygen, right? So from base camp, we start off, we climb up to camp 1, we stay 1 night there, then we actually come back down to base camp for another couple of days. That's our first rotation. Then we have our second rotation to camp 2. So once again from base camp, we go all the way to camp 1, we stay 1 night here, all the way to camp 2, we stay 1 night there, and then back down to base camp. That's still not over. Then we have our third rotation to camp 3. So once again from base camp, we go all the way to camp 1 for 1 night, we go to camp 2 for 1 night, we go to camp 3 for 1 night, back down to camp 2 for 1 night, and then all the way back down to base camp. Now this was really like torture. It was so hard. Because imagine if you're doing a project. It's like you make your project, then you break it again and do it all over again, right? Or some of you said you all had been to Adam's Peak. Imagine going up to Adam's Peak, coming back down, going up again and going beyond, coming back down, and nothing like Adam's Peak, okay? Like at least you can breathe here. The higher you go, you can't breathe. It's so hard to breathe as well. So now, I mean, we are crazy as mountaineers, but there's actually a scientific reason. We don't just go up and down because we're just nuts, but because there's actually a scientific reason behind that. If you want to stay alive, everyone has to follow that rule of climbing high and sleeping low, which basically means that when we go up here at this height, there's only 30% oxygen at camp 3. So when we go up and down and sleep up higher, go up, come down, up, do that whole process, our body actually starts to produce red blood cells naturally, right? Now you know what Lance Armstrong did some time ago? He injected oxygenated blood because then you'll be faster, quicker. Now here we're not injecting anything like that, but our body actually naturally produces more blood cells, which means with low oxygen levels, we can actually start staying alive on the mountain and continue to go up the mountain. But that wasn't easy at all. The most difficult part here was that between each camp, there was a time limit. Just like your exams, there was a deadline. So for example, our guides told us from base camp to camp 1, some people take about 5 hours, maybe some people might take 6 hours, but you can't take more than 7 hours. That's the maximum cutoff time. And if you take more than 7 hours, you are given a second chance. But if you fail your second chance, that's it. You have to go back home, pack your bags, and off you go. Because they don't have time for you. It just means this time you're not fit enough. You go back home, train harder, come back next time. It's not safe for you if you can't keep up to the speed that's recommended. There is a certain speed you have to maintain. So that was a lot of pressure, right? And after all this sponsorship that we got for 20 million rupees for the 2 of us, it was also added pressure that people had given us money to do this, and they were expecting us to also do it, right? They wanted their logo somewhere on the mountain. So that wasn't easy either for us. And that's where teamwork played a huge role for us, because when Johan was down, I would encourage him. When he was down, he would encourage me, because it was quite a depressing place here, because you feel so cut off from the rest of the world. We did have Wi-Fi, but when you leave base camp, there's no more communication. Like nothing works out there. There's only a satellite phone, which our guides had, but we didn't have any communication, so we had to, of course, go to old-fashioned methods of communicating face-to-face with our colleagues, which is not bad, but it just meant that there was limited things to do out there, right? So that wasn't easy at all, but that was where you needed to also be mentally strong, not just physically strong. And I'll come back to that part a bit later. So once you do your 3 rotations and you're still healthy and you haven't broken an arm or you haven't got a diarrhea or you haven't got a cold or a flu or something, and remember it's also freezing cold, so you can get sick very easily. And when you get sick, you don't heal very fast because of the low levels of oxygen. But if you do all of that and you're still fine, then you are allowed to attempt the final round to go to the summit, which is again from base camp up to camp 1 for a night, 2 for a night, 3 for a night, 4, and then up and all the way back to camp 2. But I'll come to that part a bit later, right? Okay, so moving on from here, I'll touch a little bit about life at base camp and beyond. So our food at base camp was actually, I can't complain. The photographs on the left-hand side are the food that we had at base camp, which was actually quite good. Rice, I like fried rice. On the days we would go on those rotations, because sometimes people break their arms or legs, they fall into crevices and things. They would give us this fancy meal, like it was fancy for us, like a chicken sizzler, because it was almost like the last supper. You might not come back, you might, injure yourself. So it's like, eat a really good meal and then go off. So we were quite happy for this particular meal, but also knowing that it had other reasons. And of course, there was lots of potatoes, which is also not so appetizing. After 30 days, 60 days of potatoes, you get sick of potatoes, because the yaks would also eat potatoes. So they carried their potatoes and our potatoes. So we had a lot of potatoes. French fries, mashed potatoes, curried potatoes, any which way. And now I hate potatoes. I don't want to see it again. Anyway, then at camp 1, which is a much smaller camp, they had these, this is one of our guides. So they would melt the ice in a pan, and we had these packets of food on the top here. And these are like the packets you get in the military. So I mean, the company we went with is a US company, so they had like those US military packets that they brought with them. And it would say spaghetti meatballs or fried rice, but it didn't taste like anything. There was no salt, there was no chili. It tasted worse than baby food, but we had to eat it, right? Because the next day we would have to wake up and walk 10 hours or 9 hours or whatever the challenge that was in front of us. So it was really, I mean, there were chocolates and things which also would freeze, but you had to also eat what was available, and that wasn't so easy, because the higher you go, you also lose your appetite. So with a bad appetite, with almost no appetite, trying to eat this was also really hard, and that was also part of the challenge we had. Then we have a few of my favorite photographs. The toilet facilities here on the mountain. Now, on the left-hand side, we have the shower. So this tent, actually, you can stand up inside the tent. It's quite a tall tent. And there is a gas cylinder inside it, which gives you hot water. But occasionally, the gas would run out and someone's screaming inside, because remember, the temperature at base camp is minus 20 degrees Celsius, approximately, 15 to 20, minus, okay? So it's only warm when you're directly under the shower and not otherwise. And the shower is also only at base camp. Beyond base camp, no more shower facilities. And it didn't matter, because your nose is also blocked because of the freezing cold, so you couldn't smell anything anyway. And everyone probably stank the same, so it was all right, so that didn't matter. The toilet for us, I mean, this is a toilet at base camp, which for us was like the Hilton toilet, like the best toilet ever. And I'll tell you why, because again, there was a tent like this, so you had full privacy, perfect. And see this little lining on the toilet seat. Can you see the cloth, piece of cloth on the seat? Now, you know when you go to Nuwara or Hatton or Bandarawala, how cold it is, you don't want to sit on that seat, right? It's freezing. So imagine minus 20 degrees, it's really cold. So they were very thoughtful when they put this little cloth for your bum, right? To keep it nice and warm. I mean, it wasn't heated, but at least it was not freezing. It didn't stick onto your bum. And then there was also toilet paper and wet wipes. So all the facilities that one could have at that height was there, compared to this toilet, which is the toilet at Camp 1, which was actually called, pardon me for the forgive me the Indian here, it was actually called the Poop Mahal. You can imagine why. That's not the name we gave it, the guides would actually call it the Poop Mahal. So here what they had was a short ice wall and like a semicircle, not a full circle. Behind this ice wall was like a 5-liter paint bucket, and this bucket said, let's do it, that's it. So you had to kind of go behind this ice wall, and in the morning sometimes you're like, oh, hi, good morning, I'm a little bit busy, I'll get back to you later, because all this can be seen, and and we wear this huge suit which has a zip at the back, called a rainbow zip, like that. But it's not easy with all these clothes, and of course, no water, toilet paper, you have to either hold it in your teeth, you can't keep it on the thing because it's all ice, it will get wet. You don't want to get blown off or fall into the bucket. So lots of complications, not easy. And I'm sharing this information with you Also because we had to get used to this toilet, right? You cannot go to the toilet 1 or 2 days, let's say, if you're really like picky about washrooms. But 2 months, it's impossible. You have to go, right? You have your meals, you have to go to the toilet. It's part of life on the mountain. And you couldn't say, oh my God, I'm too shy, I'm too scared, I can't do that. You just had to do it. If you wanted to go to the next level, you had to get past Camp 1. And if you didn't get used to this toilet, and by the way, Johan is only posing for the photograph, he's not demonstrating anything, right? He's just sitting there for the picture only. But if you didn't get used to this toilet, the toilet at Camp 3 was actually on a 75-degree slope. There was a rope attached to on a long side, so you had to connect yourself to a rope. The bucket is there, there's no wall, and then there are people walking there. So by that time you're like, okay, hi, enjoy your hike, right? But you had to also like make sure you don't go sliding down the mountain in the process. So more challenging, but we had to get used to this. So we had to get used to just living on the mountain, which was like sleeping on the mountain was difficult. I remember so many nights I couldn't sleep because I couldn't breathe. So I would just sit up, I'd keep my backpack and just sit up the whole night and go crazy because like there's nothing to do. My tent mate was this woman from Australia. She had those adult coloring books. So sometimes I'd wake up and I'd just like take that and just color with my head torch. But sometimes I'm just waiting till morning because at least in the daytime you are walking, you're talking. At night it's really horrible. But what do? You just have to put up with it, right? There's nothing else to do. It's too cold to go outside. We had to also learn to pee into a bottle with a wide mouth bottle because it's too cold to go outside to pee, right? So that was also a challenge because we were asked to bring like the Nalgene water bottles, you know, they've got a wide mouth. They said bring two for your water bottles and a third one for a pee bottle. And when you pee into the bottle, you have to make sure you empty it also because it can get full. And if you keep it outside your tent, it freezes. Then you can't open the lid and you can't pee again. So we had to keep it inside the tent, which meant that we had to put duct tape on that bottle because at night you didn't want to drink from the wrong bottle accidentally. So added challenges. I'm just sharing this because it was those little things of living, brushing your teeth. I had to stop after Camp 1. Why? Because when you brush your teeth, you have to wash your toothbrush. You can't wash your toothbrush with gloves on, right? Because you need to wash it with your fingers. But you can't take your gloves off at Camp 1 because you can get frostbite instantly, which means frostbite is where your nerve endings can die and your fingertips have to be amputated. So we needed our fingers for the rest of the journey and for like life in general. So that was important. So you just stopped brushing teeth after a point because you had to also climb, right? Anyway, so that's what I meant, that we had to also adapt to our new environment. We had to change. This was our home. If we didn't change, we could not go to the next level, and life is also like that. Changes happen around us in our personal life, in our professional life, all the time, right? In our love lives, very difficult, lots of challenges, but our exams will continue, our goals are there, our studies are there, the degree is waiting for us, or it might not wait for us, but we've got to go on that path that we want to. But we need to also change and adapt and change so that we can face all those challenges as it comes, right? At least that's what we learned on the mountain as well. Okay, now once you pass base camp, we come across this section called the Khumbu Icefall, which looks like this. I mean, it's a huge area where there are massive blocks of ice, huge, as tall as this building or even bigger. You can see these black dots are actually people, and they're just big blocks of ice. And some places you cross vertically, that's Johan on this ladder. And these are normal aluminium ladders, about 5 ladders tied together. And remember, it's windy, you can't breathe, it's very difficult to breathe. The ladder is it's shaking pretty much, but you have to follow the path. There's no other path also. Some places, I don't know if you can see this one here, there are crevices in the ice, and you have to cross horizontal ladders. And I remember at base camp, they taught us how to cross these ladders because we're wearing crampons on our boots. They're like spikes so that we can walk on the ice. And we have huge mountaineering boots. And they did tell us, when you're crossing the ladders, don't look into the crevice because you can't see the bottom. But how many of us do things we're not supposed to do? Me. So I did exactly that. And I remember feeling it was scary. It was really scary because you can't see the bottom. And we had heard stories of people who were crossing the ladder and their spikes can get caught on those rungs. And you can trip and fall into the crevice. And even though there is a safety rope, the way you fall matters because sometimes you can fall the wrong way and the spikes on your boot can cut the rope. It has happened previously and people have disappeared forever. So So I just had to stop, take a deep breath, and then only focus on my boots and continue crossing the ladder. But you just had to keep doing it. You just had to focus on what you were doing one step at a time and keep doing that and forget everything else around you, which was also quite scary. Okay, so then we go up camp 1, 2, and then we come to camp 3. So here I want to share a quick story about how this whole journey actually changed my life in a very personal way, in a way that I never expected it to do. So at this point, I just want to remind you now at camp 3, before getting to camp 3, remember in the beginning I told you when you go from one camp to another camp, we had a time limit. Remember I mentioned that, like a deadline? Now from camp 2 to 3, the deadline was about 9 hours maximum. And everyone was talking about, all the other climbers from different parts of the world had also come, obviously. And some people had been there now for their second attempt, their third attempt to climb Everest. And they were all saying how difficult this part of the journey was because like 90% of the journey was a 90-degree ice wall. So 90 degrees wall is just one of these walls, all the way up for about 8 hours of that whole journey. So it's really tiring, it's very scary. And I was really worried because in those previous rotations, I would make it on time, but I was almost always the last person, right? I was also the smallest person in the team. And I thought, okay, that's just because anyone taller than me who takes 10 steps, I have to take 20 steps and walk much faster because my cadence is shorter. So anyway, on this day, I was really nervous because here were these big people, like much bigger than me and taller, very muscular and all that, saying they are nervous about it. So that was intimidating for me. And I said, if you're nervous, imagine me. And I actually asked my guide, I said, can we go 1 hour early, like before the others? And he said, yeah, no problem. Oh, sorry, I also forgot to mention that each climber, we have a guide, each one. It's on a 1-to-1 ratio, because that's also the safest way to climb this mountain. Because as I said in the beginning, we didn't only want to climb it, we also wanted to come back down safely, right? So each of us had our own guides, and I told my guide, I said, if we can go 1 hour earlier, I'll feel a bit more at ease. He said, no problem, let's leave at, I think, 3:30 in the morning, or 4 o'clock in the morning. So we left 1 hour before the rest. And for the first time, I remember I was ahead of the pack. 1 hour later, I could see people far behind me, like little dots coming behind. And I was happily going along. But at some point, everyone, of course, overtook me, and they would say, good job, and I was like, oh, okay, they'll go on. Because, of course, the thing is that you also go at your own pace, right? Because it's too tiring for you to go at someone else's pace. So you go at your own pace with your guide, but it can be demotivating when, even though I had a 1 hour lead, everyone would still overtake me and carry on, and they disappear into the mountain. And then at some point, my guide tells me, like I think I stopped to have a water break, and he's like, I'm sorry, we've got to turn back now. Your 9 hours have passed. You're not going to make it because you're about 3 hours away from the next camp. You're really slow today, you're not going to make it. And I was horrified. I said, no, please, I can't go back. I've come up 9 hours. I can't go back down all the way to camp 2. And I begged and pleaded. And he said, no, we have to turn back. Johan and everyone else, they're all at camp 3. And you only come up 2/3 of the way. You have another 1/3 more to go. And I kept complaining and fussing and like basically begging and pleading. And he said, no, if you continue, there's a storm that's coming. It will take your life. It can destroy your life. And it can also destroy my life. And I knew this guy because over the past couple of days, I also found out how he had lost friends on the mountain. Lost as in they had died on the mountain, right? He's a climbing Sherpa from Nepal. He also has only 8 fingers. He lost 2 fingers to frostbite. Sometimes one mistake is all it takes. So then when he said that, I had to also listen to what he said and walk back down to camp 2. And I was crying all the way back down, which didn't help because my goggles would frost up. And we had to wear these ski goggles and you can't take them off because it's so cold your corneas can freeze. And you can go blind in a few days. So it wasn't helpful that I was crying all the way down. So blurry vision, anyway I went back down to camp 2. And for me that was like a turning point because I was really worried. Now imagine you've done something, say you've just run a 100-meter race and you're told it's not good enough. You've got to improve your timing in 24 hours. How do you do that? Just overnight. For me, and my biggest fear I kept thinking was that, I thought maybe I'm too small, maybe my body is too small. I thought maybe my lungs are too small, right? Because we are still not using oxygen cylinders on our back. We only do that after camp 3, so we are breathing in natural air. And I thought everyone else has bigger lungs, they can take bigger steps. And my biggest fear was if I also, like I'm here, I've got this childhood dream, I've come all the way to Camp 2 on Everest. If I don't climb when I go back home, my other fear was, what would people say about women and mountaineering, which is anyway a male-dominated sport? Only 10% of women in the world have climbed Everest. From about 5,000 people who climbed it to the top, about 400, I was the 419th woman to climb it. That's a very small amount of women who climbed it, right? So my fear was that people are going to say, because you're a woman, you didn't make it. And I know that's not true, because our gender does not matter. That's what I believe in very strongly. It doesn't matter whether you are a man or a woman. If you have a dream and a passion, you can achieve it. And then I also remembered what Johan told me. Because in all those rotations, whenever I was slow, I would ask him, how is it that you get there like better than the time, like not on time, like a bit ahead of time, and why am I always the last? And he would say something that I never understood until that day. He would say, Jay, it's all in your mind. And I was like, what do you mean? I couldn't understand it. Because I thought, my legs, I would walk, and then my legs would just give up on me. They don't go beyond a point. They just would not function. And he would say, it's in your mind, it's in your mind. And on that day, I think I had to think about what he said. And for some reason, because I was all alone, remember Johan was at the next camp, and I thought to myself, okay, I had to remind myself that I had years of experience. When I was 23 years old, like about 15 years before that day, I had done 2 courses in mountaineering. So I had the qualifications. I had the years, about 9 years of climbing in different countries, in about 10 countries across the world. So I had the experience, I had the knowledge, I had the skills. What I did not have was the belief in myself. That was it. It was like a mental switch that I had to turn on. And the next day, I think I just woke up and told myself, that was the only thing I did. I just told myself, I'm not going to give up, I'm not going to stop, I can do this. Every step of the way, I just only said, I can do this. Because by now, even my guide had given up on me. He was like, you go back and take somebody else, you're too slow, you won't make this. And this was now making me even more upset and angry. Because, they also have some patience. He was very patient in the beginning. But everyone had there's also a limit to someone's patience. So he was, I don't know, maybe it was also a tactic that he used to make me angry and get me up the mountain. But I think at some point it was like a mental switch where I told myself, I've got the experience, I've got the skills. I just needed to believe in myself. And it's like the missing piece of a jigsaw puzzle. And all the way up to Camp 3, I just said, I can do it, I will do it somehow. And I got up there in 8.5 hours. Like for me, that was a huge victory. I can't even now when I think about it, and I think, how on earth did I do that? I know it's up here, not my legs, not my body, my mind, right? So for me, that was a huge lesson I learned, like Everest taught me that actually our minds are the strongest muscle in our body. Is it a muscle? Yeah, okay. Anyway, so because I know someone recently looked at me and said today in the morning at the swim class, you climbed Everest, but I thought someone with big muscles would be the one who's climbed Everest. I said, no, actually my mind, our brains is the biggest muscle, which you can't see, but yeah, it's the strongest. So remember when you do something, you have to believe in yourself. If you put all the energy, if you studied hard, you worked for it, you've practiced, you really work, you're passionate about it. If you doubt yourself, you can't get to that next level. You have to also believe in yourself, and that's like a mental switch. You just turn it on. Most of us might have it turned off. Just switch it on, and that will make a difference. For me, and I keep saying this is what changed my life, because before Everest, I would joke with a lot of my friends when they would all talk about mental strength being so important. You all heard it, I'm sure. Your teachers have told you, your parents have told you, the mind is so important, all this blah, blah, all that. And I would be like, yeah, it's not for me because I'm a negative person, because my blood type is actually B negative. That's a fact. But I would joke saying, it's in my blood, I can't be so positive, right? So just shut up and go away. You stick to your positivity, I'm not so positive. That was my excuse. Now I realize, actually no, that if we really want to do something, even if we are scared, if you want to do it, we can learn how to do that, and then you just have to trust in yourself, right? And that makes all the difference. So I'll move on from here. Then we get to, after Camp 3, we get to Camp 4, which is also called the death zone for a very good reason, because at this height, your body actually begins to deteriorate, because it's about 30% or less than 30%, actually about 20% oxygen in the atmosphere. And when I say deteriorate, what happens is that it starts to slow down, and we don't actually stay a night here because it's not good for you. Like your organs can start packing up slowly, your kidneys and then your heart, your lungs. Like getting frostbite is very easy. So because your body is only focusing on your brain, your heart and your lungs. So which is why it doesn't digest food. So you can't really eat anything. The body's like, we don't need to digest food, that's too not so important to do. What's more important is to keep your core organs functioning. So it's in that sense, it's also conserving energy. And everything slows down. Taking a step, we are kind of walking at a very at this pace. Take 2 breaths, then you walk. That's our pace at Camp 4 and beyond, right? Now at this point, this is the last camp. So we get to Camp 4 around, say, 12 o'clock in the afternoon, 1 o'clock. And then that same evening, because we don't stay a night, the same evening we have to attempt the final journey to the top of the mountain, to the summit. Now, Johan and I obviously wanted to be on the top together so we can take a selfie and, the flag and everything. But remember my pace, I was also slower. So we asked the guide, what should we do, how should we do this? And then our guide suggested, he said, okay, why don't you go 1 hour earlier because you're slower. You go ahead at 8 p.m. and Johan can come at 9 p.m. with the rest of the team. So we said, okay, no problem. So I began at 8 o'clock and Johan began his journey at 9 o'clock. And you can sort of see the path here, just this white line going all the way up. And anyway, so then Johan got up to this point at 8,400 meters. And he stopped to have a small water break here. Now remember, Everest is 8,850 meters. So he has another 450 meters to go. Sorry, vertical meters. So, at that height, 450 meters would take you another 3 hours at least. But still, he's very close, right? He got up to this point and he was having his water. And then his guide tells him, I'm very sorry, there seems to be a problem in your oxygen cylinder. You've got to go back down. And he was like, what? Are you crazy? No, was his first reaction. And he said, yeah, it's showing low levels of oxygen. Because remember, at this point, after Camp 3, we're actually using oxygen cylinders, which is in our backpack. And we are breathing using the cylinder. So we also have limited amounts of oxygen in the cylinder. But he said this to Johan, and Johan's first impression was, no, you're crazy. This is so close. I'm sure I have enough oxygen to just go up there and come back down. So he put his mask back on and started taking a few steps. And then the guy grabbed him by the arm and said, look, you can go up the mountain. You have enough to go up, but you don't have enough to come back down. And that's when Johan had to actually stop, think, and take a step back. And he had to think about the bigger picture, right? Like what was more important here? Climbing the mountain, making it to the top, or his life, right? His life, he has only one chance. Climbing the mountain, many chances, because the mountain's not going to grow some legs and walk off somewhere. It'll be there forever. But life, we all have just one chance. And Johan always talks about how, for him, it was an experience where he's a very spiritual person, and he had to draw on the God that he believes in, and to help him make a decision. And I am very grateful that he made the correct decision to turn back. Because remember, at this height, your brain is not really working rationally. You have a condition called hypoxia, even with an oxygen cylinder. Because the cylinder only gives us 50% from the cylinder. The balance is ambient air that's around us. So our brain is almost lacking in oxygen. It's called a state of hypoxia, which doesn't help you make rational decisions. So for Johan to actually think that actually my life is more important, I have family and friends at home waiting for me to come back alive. The fact that he could think that and go and come back down is a huge, I think that itself is a victory. And at that height, not a lot of people make that decision, which is why there are about 200 dead bodies of people, of climbers, who made the wrong choice and who continued when they had to turn back. So that itself is another lesson where sometimes we've got to turn back and do it again. But if it's our life that's at stake, then we've got to really think twice about that, right? So, and we also talk about the fact that this was a team journey. I didn't do this alone. Johan and I both made it together, right? So he turned back, and I didn't know any of this because I had gone 1 hour early. And so I'll come back to the story where I left Camp 4 at 8 p.m. that night, 1 hour before Johan. And this is like the last stage of the journey. You can see the path is also really narrow, but we are really above the clouds at this height. And this is the southeast ridge, so the last section, it goes all the way along here, and that is the summit. And I remember on this part, it must have been about 4 o'clock in the morning. And on my left-hand side, I could see the full moon because it was also a Vesak Poya day. And on my right-hand side, I had the sun that was just coming up on the horizon. And it was quite beautiful. I don't have a picture of that, but I do remember it in my head. And then that is a picture on the summit itself, which is actually quite small. I remember when we got to the summit, my guide tells me, okay, we're here. And I couldn't believe him. I actually thought, what, really? And he said, yeah, this is it. And then first thing I did was to hug him and say thank you, because without him, I wouldn't have made it there. And the summit is also quite small. It's about maybe the space here in this, yeah, actually around here, this space. So it's proper pinnacle, and you can see China on the other side because the border goes right across the summit of Everest, Tibet and Nepal, right? I had a photograph with my guide, and then I also took a photograph of my parents, which I pulled out, because my father had passed away about 2 years before this, in 2014. And for me, I know that he was with me on the journey, and I'm also grateful because as a child growing up, I told you I was climbing all the trees in the garden. I was able to do that because my parents are the ones who taught me how to climb. In fact, my father said, if you're climbing, then climb properly. And he said, basic rules of climbing, this is how you do it, right? So, and when I started rock climbing, he said, go and do it properly, learn how to do it. Even when I started surfing, I tried surfing, I'm not so great at it. He said, wear a life jacket because you're not a good swimmer. So I didn't look cool at all. I mean, imagine a life jacket on a surfboard. No. I was probably the dorkiest person on the beach. But I did it because I was also not a great swimmer, right? So safety was always important. He didn't say don't, but he encouraged me to do, they're all adventure sports, high risk, but he said if you're doing it, do it safe. And I know that because they gave me that support, this was also possible, right? Then there's also the journey coming back down the mountain, which again, there's no helicopter at the top waiting to take you off. So unfortunately, but coming back down, so going up took about 9 hours, and coming back down was another 14 hours to come back down, because we had to go back to Camp 2. Camp 4 is too small, Camp 3 there was no room either, and you had to walk back to Camp 2. Also because anything happens to your body or you're sick, a helicopter can only come up to Camp 2 because the air is too thin above that. So you had to walk back down somehow. If you decided to I wanted to curl up and sleep most of the time because I was so tired. But luckily I had my guide with me who kept screaming and shouting, saying, get up, we have to go. Because there are people who do this without a guide sometimes who are not as experienced, and you just stop for a small break, have a nap, and you never wake up. Right? There are lots of people who lose their life on the mountain because of stupid mistakes. So I was grateful that part of my team, not only Johan, our guides and our mountaineering company were also part of the team we had. Then there's this quotation that I would like to share with all of you. I'm sure all of you all know who Sir Edmund Hillary is? Yeah? Anyone? Yes? Who was he?
He was a New Zealander who went with James Hunt on that expedition.
Yes.
And he and Tenzing Norgay.
Yes. I like the fact that you said he and Tenzing Norgay were the first two people in the world to summit Mount Everest in 1953. Right? He's Sherpa Tenzing Norgay from Nepal and Hillary from New Zealand. So Hillary said something that actually resonates with both Johan and myself. What he said is, it is not the mountain you conquer. It is not the mountain we conquer, but ourselves, right? And that is so true. When you're out there, I mean, imagine a bucket of ice, right? A huge bucket of ice, and imagine some ants inside that. We were those ants. There were avalanches all around us every single day because the ice is always melting, right? And nature, you can't conquer nature. Think of the tsunami we had, the floods we have every year. And we conquer nature? People lose their lives, their home. So we can't conquer Everest. I've never conquered Everest. I can't conquer nature. None of us can. We are too small. We are too insignificant. But we can conquer ourselves. And I like to break that down into 3 parts. Firstly, we can conquer our minds. And I already told you about this. If we believe in ourselves and if we are passionate about something, we have the skills and the qualification, we put in all the hard work, you have to believe in yourself. And that's how you can conquer your mind, right? It's like that switch. Secondly, we can also conquer our fears. Now, my biggest fear on Everest was that death itself. I actually wrote my last will because I was really scared, really scared that I won't come back, because that's also the reality. Every year, this mountain claims lives. Right? And the year before we went, in 2015, there was an avalanche, the earthquake in Nepal, you must have heard about that massive earthquake that destroyed all the heritage sites. It also killed 19 climbers on the mountain, on Everest. The year before that, in 2014, about 16 Sherpas died in the Khumbu Icefall in a couple of seconds because there was a really bad avalanche in the Khumbu Icefall that we had to cross 4 times minimum, right? So your life was like, you were really worried, you didn't know when it could end at any moment. But we had to take all the precautions also and mitigate the risks. But beyond that, so you could go, like what we did to mitigate the risk was go with one of the best companies in the world that had a good safety record. They were not just going to take us at any cost. We wanted them to tell us, you can't go today because you're not fit, and not say we'll take you at any cost, right? Because there are cheaper companies that will take you up and you won't come back down. But, I mean, I also say that fears, I would have a lot of fear about speaking in public. I would hate standing, I hate lecterns anyway, but I would hate coming in front of a crowd like this and addressing an audience, even a smaller audience than this or a large audience, right? I would have to write down the entire speech. Anyone here who doesn't like public speaking? Or you're all like, yeah, great. So I was like that in school and university, and I would avoid it. I'd get sick if they asked me to. I'd say, no, I'm not sick, I'm really ill, I can't make it that day. But what I've learned is that you try it, right? People get you to do it, you might actually enjoy it. You might actually be good at it. But until you try, you don't know that. Try it once, try it twice, try it about 10 times. And if you're still bad at it, okay, then you know, right? But till you try, don't give up. Think of something, one thing that you're really scared of, but you want to try, and just try it this year and see, because you might be able to find a new skill that you never tried before, right? So that's how we can also overcome our fears. And thirdly, and most importantly, I always say we can also conquer gender stereotypes. I mean, I have so many stories I can share with this, but I'll limit it to a few. And I'm saying this because I didn't plan to become the first Sri Lankan person to climb Everest. That was not my ambition. My goal was to just climb this mountain. That's all I wanted to do. It just so happened nobody had done it before. But remember, there was also Johan and myself. There were 2 of us climbing this, right? So we were both going to make it and come back, or not at all, either way. But what happened was something that was beyond my control and beyond Johan's control. We didn't know what would happen. And it just so happened that, okay, this thing happened to his oxygen cylinder, and I ended up becoming the first Sri Lankan person. And it's funny because when I came back to Sri Lanka, I'm also not a very public person. You can ask my batchmate there, I'm just a regular person. But then because of Everest, all the media would come, all the attention was on me, and I would keep saying, but there's 2 of us, there's Johan and me. And then they're like, oh, he didn't make it, right? And he's a man, so he didn't make it. And they would sort of see him as a failure, because they're like, he couldn't climb, right? And then they see me and they're like, oh, she climbed and he didn't? Like, what's wrong with him? Is he really a man even? You know what I mean? Like, these are gender stereotypes, right? These are also how we see, like, gender. And people would say, okay, she's the first Sri Lankan woman to climb Everest. And my friends would say, no, she's the first Sri Lankan person. Because imagine if a man had climbed it first, would you say he's the first Sri Lankan man to climb Everest? No, you just say first Sri Lankan to climb Everest. Like, but you qualified by saying a woman, because then journalists would be like, okay, we were the first Sri Lankan woman to climb Everest here, blah, blah, blah. Then they're like, so who's climbed before you? Who's the first Sri Lankan person? Because there's an assumption that there's a man who's climbed it before. So again, gender, stereotypes. But this one story I must share with you is that both Johan and I were sharing the same story with students in Kurunagala, in a government school in Kurunagala, actually off Kurunagala district. And we were the students were about between the ages of 9 and 15 maybe. And when we finished, it was a mixed school as well, like a tiny school. When we finished our session, lots of the boys ran to Johan and the girls ran to me. They wanted selfies and photos and autographs and all that. And then there were these 5 girls who later came up to me and said, and they said it in Sinhalese, but I'll say it now in English. They said, Miss, we are so happy that you climbed Everest first. And I said, why do you say that? And they said, well, because you have shown us that girls can also come first. So I said, okay. I said, girls can come first, boys can come first. It doesn't matter whether you're a boy or a girl, right? If you have a passion for something and you work really hard, you can come first. And then she said, and she was talking about sports in that relation to a sports meet, I think. And she said, no, miss, our sports teacher has told us that boys are always first and girls are second. Now, this is rubbish. This is nonsense, right? this is in Sri Lanka, in a district of Kurunegala, right? And it doesn't only happen in the rural areas. These comments are from people in Colombo also. Another girl told me that her dream is to become a pilot, and she's really scared because her parents are like, you're a girl, what can you do by becoming a pilot? But she's like, I'm going to somehow study the science subjects I need to do for my A-levels. She's only in school, right? So the opportunities are less for girls, but we can create that space, because I always say we need to challenge. We need to question these stereotypes and find out where they come from. Because remember that all of us have a special skill, each and every one of us here in this room. And gender stereotypes only prevent you from being the best you can be. Because if you want to be a neurosurgeon and someone says, oh, you're a woman, you can't really do that, or if you're a pilot, or whatever, or you're a boy who wants to do ballet, right? How many, there are boys I know who love ballet. In fact, there was a boy in a tap dance at British Council. A mother came up with her 11-year-old boy saying he's the only tap dancer in his class. And the girls all tease him. Again, stereotypes, but he loves dancing and he keeps going. So there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that you have to challenge those stereotypes and question them. And if these stereotypes are actually made by society, because they're not written up in books anywhere, they're made by society. And society is actually all of us. So we can change these rules, which means that we can then follow our dream, whatever they are, wherever they are, and not have to be inhibited by gender stereotypes. So I always say that you can question the stereotypes. Don't let those stereotypes hold you back from following your passions and your dreams, yeah? So that's what I mean when you say we can conquer these stereotypes. We don't have to conquer the mountain, but we can conquer the stereotypes. So I have to also say that the journey didn't end in 2016, because Johan went back, some of you may have heard, in 2018, last year. He trained all over again, raised money all over again, and went back just to complete the last 450 meters of that mountain. And that takes a lot of courage. Because remember, when we came back, people saw him as a failure. And he didn't climb just to prove anything. He said he also wanted, because initially he was like, I'm not going, neither of us like, we're not going back there, my gosh. And I couldn't go back with him for many reasons. One is the cost, but secondly, I was too scared to go back. The first time we were equally ready. We were 500% ready. If we had to stay on the mountain, we were ready to face it. But I know if I had to turn back and I hadn't finished the journey, I would have also gone back up. But it's not easy. If you're not at the same level and mental state, you can't do this journey. You have to do it for yourself. So he went back, and really kudos to him, because he also had one of the most amazing views that day. Like, I think one of the best views in 17 years. And he also says that, there's also always a time for everything. Maybe it wasn't his time in 2016. They also say that in Nepal, they believe that the mountain chooses you. You cannot choose the mountain. So for whatever reason, it chose me, and it also gave him the most amazing view in 2018. And I always say our journey only ended when he came back in 2018, because that was a journey as a team, right? So I want to share this last slide, which is actually a video. So you can see here the view. It's really amazing. And that's the wind that you can hear. And you can actually see the curvature of the earth. That's China, Tibet. And this is the path we come up, Nepal. But look at that, amazing, right? Because I had a view, I could only see clouds, but he had this view. And it's about, minus 50 degrees Celsius on the summit there. Really cold, but beautiful. Now you know why we climb, for that kind of view, right? Or even without the view, it's still an amazing journey. Okay, so I will stop here and say thank you very much for being patient with the story, and thank you.
At any point while climbing Mount Everest, have you ever thought of backing down and stop?
Did I ever think of turning back?
Yeah.
Actually, no, because it was that kind of dream that I really wanted to do this, but I did worry about how I would manage the timing. That was my biggest fear, that timing between the camps. because I kept thinking I'm too small, that I might not make that timing properly, that I'm not big enough like everyone else. But I never wanted to turn back. I just kept thinking, I just kept doubting myself about how I can do this, right? So, I mean, I guess it's like wanting to turn back almost.
But one more question. If you do have children, and like, let's say they're around age 20, would you be okay with them climbing Mount Everest? Would you
Yeah,
be really scared?
absolutely. I mean, if they're after older than 18, I would be open to them doing anything they want, because I was fortunate that my parents, like I didn't even I told my mother, don't watch the Everest film before I went up. And she watched it after I came back and almost had a heart attack, I think. But I'm grateful because I think it's because from even before 18, my parents loved me to climb trees and do rock climbing and do all these sports, when lots of other friends in my class didn't get that permission because they were girls. So even before 18, I would encourage, but for Everest, there is also an age limit. I would definitely support them, for sure, yeah.
All right.
Thank you for the question.
Well, I don't mind if I'm fit enough to climb as well, but I raise my hand for the question. First of all, thank you so much for sharing your beautiful story. Actually, my question is in two parts. First is, at what point in your journey, since Johan was behind you, you realized that he was not going to basically join you and continue and climb up? And obviously it was later. And at what point, when you actually met him, he told you his distress, why he was able to not join you, and what was your and his reaction at that point?
That's a good question. I forgot to cover that in the story. So I had gone up, and then I got to the summit. It was about 5 o'clock, dawn was breaking. And now my guide and I were waiting maybe about 20 minutes, but you can't also wait too long because your oxygen cylinder is running out, right? It's all timed, there's like precision timing. So we thought he would come up any moment, but he didn't. And our walkie-talkies are also not working. So then I started coming back down. He said, okay, we'll just have to turn back. We started going back down, and I only met him at Camp 4. So it's funny because I saw him like at Camp 4, I was going back down, and I saw him in the distance, and I thought, how on earth did he go up and come back down before me? Like in my head, I thought maybe I missed him, which is also just shows that I was also hypoxic. I wasn't thinking rationally because my brain was freezing, literally also. But because if you pass him, the path is so narrow, you kind of have to hug people along the way if they're overtaking you. So I would have seen him for sure if he passed me. But clearly he was not on the path because he had to turn back. And when I met him, I said, so I was like, yo, what? And he was like, I couldn't make it, I had to turn back. And we both broke down crying. We were like, what? And there was no way to get another cylinder because each climber gets 2 cylinders. And that's what you pay for. If you want an extra cylinder, it costs $6,000. And you had to give the order in January. We were climbing in April, May. So that was not happening. Only the very, very rich do that. But 2 cylinders is normally what happens. There was some malfunction in the cylinder. So then I took a break at Camp 4 and he carried on down. But that was the time we met, and I was so upset as well. So I couldn't think of anything about the mountain also. We were both really, really upset and couldn't figure out what had happened and why it had happened. But yeah, that answers your question. Thanks.
What would you say is harder? Is it harder to be physically strong, or is it harder to be mentally strong?
Good question, because this is something I have always, I guess, before Everest, I would always think of myself as someone who's physically strong, even though I might not look it, because I've always played sports throughout my life. And I would always think I don't have a strong mind. I would think emotional stuff I can't deal with, like I'm really horrible at it. But I think Everest has really taught me that that's also a mindset, right? Because I was stuck in my life thinking my mind is weak, my mind is weak, my mind is weak. Now if I tell someone my mind is weak, they're going to laugh at me because they're like, you climbed Everest, right? So now I know that actually it's all about what you tell yourself. And it's equally important to have a strong mind and a strong body. But now I've also learned, because while I was at base camp, I had a friend of mine who was sending me articles, academic articles actually, about ultramarathon runners, about how they're able to push beyond the point, beyond the physical pain. Because you run for like days, and I can't imagine how they do that. But because I was also in pain climbing this mountain, physically in pain, because my lungs, you get a really dry cough and people have known to have broken their ribs in the process because of the cough. So my back, every time I laughed or coughed, my back was aching. My feet were aching because also my boots were too big for me. You don't get size boots for my size. So all this, there was added pain, and then I would read these thinking, to go beyond the pain, it's more like a mind switch. You just have to tell yourself it's not painful, which sounds crazy, but that's what ultramarathon runners also do. You kind of go beyond the pain and say your body can, and that's how they also push their bodies to the extreme. And for me, I think that last day, when my biggest fear was that again I'll be too slow, I think I told myself I've got oxygen, which someone told me, one of the guides had told me, it's like rocket fuel, because your body is craving that. So I just told myself, I've got rocket fuel, I'm just going to go. So again, which is a mind thing. So I think it's just, it depends on what you tell yourself, and I think the mind controls that also. Yeah, I hope I answered your question.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you.
Ma'am, thank you for taking the time off your busy schedule to be here with us at UCL and for sharing with us your story of endless hard work, truly boundless passion, and the process of chasing after one's dreams, no matter how tall they may be. Pun. Please accept this small token of appreciation. Dr. Harshalas, if we could have you to give away the token, please.